Hi, I'm Patty Champ. I'm with the Rocky Mountain Research Station here in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I'm a research economist. I think I was always interested in my field. I'm a very curious person. I'm really interested in humans. I'm interested in why humans do things or why they don't do things. Once I was exposed to the intersection of economics and natural resources, I was really intrigued with the possibility of understanding why humans make the decisions that they make related to living with the natural environment. So with my research, I'm really trying to get around this problem of people believing everything they think. So I want people to delve into their hypotheses about how they think humans might be thinking or behaving or what they believe in, but I want them to delve into that with data, with systematic data that can be used to make inference about broader populations. I was lead editor on a book called A Primer on Non-Market Valuation. So that's an area that I work in, how we value the natural environment, things that fall outside of markets. So over time, I've had so many graduate students come to me and tell me that that was their Bible when they were working on their master's thesis or their dissertation. And it's just very gratifying to know that hopefully I've helped the next generation in some small way.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the Forest and Rangeland Stewardship Departmental Seminar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Ritter, a Forest Science PhD student here in the department. So I'm here today to introduce Dr. Patty Champ. Dr. Champ's an economist with the Forest Service here in town at the Rocky Mountain Research Station. She did her master's and PhD at the University of Wisconsin in economics. And so her current research is focused on economic valuation methods and the economic and social analysis of natural hazards. So I think she's going to be talking to you today about some of her work with the Wildfire Research Center. So I guess with that, why don't you join me in welcoming Dr. Champ.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me today. It's really nice to be here, and it's nice to see friendly faces out there. Today I want to talk about this team that I'm part of called the Wildfire Research Team, and we call ourselves WIRE. And I am guessing, and I guess I can ask, that many of you are graduate students in here. How many people are masters versus several masters, and then some PhD students? I know we have at least one here. Yeah, okay. And then I know there's faculty and some staff in here. So what I want to, my goals for today are to tell you a few things about this team and the work we do. And I want to tell you a little bit about like who are we and what do we do and how do we come together and how do we do it. And I think it's a great model. There's been a lot of interest in recent years in research and practice coming together, and that's what we're doing. So I think this is a great example of this. So even if your work is not in this field, I hope that like just the underlying tone about how we carry this work out spurs some thoughts for you about perhaps people you might engage with and how you could kind of think about this kind of team. And then I want to talk about what are we doing? You know, what is it we're doing? And then finally, I want to talk about like the so what. So you're doing this, you know, I'm going to tell you we're collecting a lot of data. We're working with communities, and how does that make the world a better place? So that's kind of the, you know, what it is we do. So a lot of it is kind of very nuts and bolts and how this works, and hopefully I can communicate those pieces clearly. But underlying all of this is scholarship. And I'm not going to talk so much today about what the work is that we're publishing and how we're making contributions to the literature, but we are doing that. And that is something I want to just mention, because oftentimes, especially in economics, you guys are more open-minded in forestry, so I think perhaps you don't have this dichotomy, but it's either you're doing applied work or you're doing scholarly work, but those things can't come together. And it really comes together here, and especially when I get to the end, I'm going to talk to you about some of the behavioral economics pieces we're wrapping up in here. And it's, you know, really cutting edge, it's super cool, it's really productive. So I hope I'm able to kind of communicate all those themes, excuse me, in this presentation. So, what are we doing? So we're a team that comes together, we're interdisciplinary, and we come together, well, hi Mike, to work on this wildfire issue. And we're really interested in communities. So we work at the community scale, and we're trying to use science to help communities develop better programs that can cause behavioral outcomes. As an economist, we love behavioral outcomes. I don't want to just change how you think about it, I want to change your behavior. And in this case, what we're talking about, the behavioral change, are individuals who live on private land parcels. We want them to take care of that business to reduce wildfire risk. So I'm guessing many of you are familiar with the wildfire issue. So there's like the worst graph on the planet, right? It's like, okay, we're doing all this stuff, we're spending all this money, especially when you look at 2017 in there, spending more and more money. More acres are burning, more homes are being lost. So this is a huge issue. And just to touch on that, in the introduction you mentioned I do non-market valuation, and that's really where I come from, kind of how do we value goods and services that fall outside of the market. So another aspect of fire research that I participate in, that I'm not going to talk about today though, are like the health effects of wildfire smoke exposure. Some of you work on water. You know, like there are so many costs associated with wildfire that are not captured in there. And some of the work we've done, like the health effects of wildfire smoke, they make that suppression cost look like a smaller number. So just the point being, it's a really dismal problem. So what happens is, and you know, we're working on fixes. The latest budget for the Forest Service is going to have a, you know, fix so that we don't take all of our funding that's supposed to be used for managing the national forest, and we can have a fire suppression pot where money comes from, but it's still going to be a lot of money. So it's still going to come from somewhere. But what happens is, you know, we start working, we want to get ahead of the problem, we're going to mitigate risk, we're going to work with homeowners, we're going to have all these great programs, and then there's fires and everything happens. All the resources have to go to them. Communities are devastated, they're dealing with flooding, they're dealing with all these things, and it kind of takes us off our path. So in general, our team is really trying to say, okay, how can we get out of this bad cycle and kind of get in front of it by working with communities from the get-go. And in the National Cohesive Strategy, so this is a strategy that kind of pulls together in the United States wildfire policy, and there's kind of three branches of this, or three legs of the strategy, and that's resilient landscapes, fire-adapted community, and safe response. And in there they mention there's no one-size-fits-all. Solutions have to be tailored to landscapes and communities. So in that strategy itself, it kind of calls for this, like you can't just, you know, use the same program everywhere. You have to understand the local context. And as one of our practitioners said, you need to not just understand the physical landscape of a community, you need to understand the social landscape. So that's what brings our team together. And I should mention, we just came out with 3 illustrated videos that are beautiful by Karina Branson. Perhaps some of you know her. She does some work here at CSU. And they are actually on our website. So if you go to wildfireresearchcenter.org, they're beautiful. And I've pulled out these in case you're like, wow, she's like a really good artist. I did not make those. This is Karina's work, and we've pulled these pieces out of the illustrated videos. Excuse me. So who are we? So we're this research team, and we unite research and practice, and we collect community-specific data to kind of support those local programs. And we're interagency, so the researchers are from US Forest Service, Rocky Mountain Research Station, that's me. University of Colorado Boulder, and USGS. And then we have partners that we call our practitioner partners from BLM and West Region Wildfire Council, which is a wildfire council over on the western slope of Colorado that covers several counties. And we've come together, and we come together as equal partners, and we've come together on our own. I think that's a really important part of why our group is so successful. It did not come from on high that we need to do this. We've did some work together over time, and we've decided we still like each other, so we've kept it going. And we have just started a small nonprofit organization called the Wildfire Research Center that we're setting up because we feel like the model we have with some of us sitting in federal agencies isn't so great for responding to all the requests we've had from communities to do work. So we want to set up a nonprofit that can respond more quickly. It will have to be funded from the outside largely. A lot of these local communities don't have a lot of funds, and they collect all the data, so they do invest quite a bit in participating with us. So we're setting up this center, but it's kind of a cool story. So way back when, in I think like 2004, Tony might have been there, there was a little get-together in Lyons, Colorado. Were you there? Maybe it was before your time. Okay, so it was really, though, the first time. It was called something like really appropriate, like Social Values of Wildfire. And at that time, really the kind of social research looking at wildfire was just getting going, and they brought folks together from the practitioner part. So there were a bunch of State Forest Service folks there, and folks from Larimer County and Boulder County and Colorado Springs and Jefferson County. So all over the state, we kind of came together, and researchers were there too. And that was really my first experience with kind of wildfire, bringing those two groups together. And personally, I was just getting my feet wet at that time on projects. So I was doing some work with a graduate student, Hannah Brankert-Smith, who's now a colleague I do work with all the time, in Larimer and Boulder County. And right after that, I had a project that I was working on in Colorado Springs, and then this person, Chris Barth, who's part of our team, who's with the BLM now, he started working in Colorado Springs. So I had kind of those pieces going together. And then Chris moved from Colorado Springs over to the Western Slope, still with the BLM, and he called me and said, why don't we get a project going here? And it was kind of like the best party you could ever have. I'm like, okay, can I bring my friend Hannah, because she's great, and you know. And then I have this really smart graduate student, James Meldrum, working for me. Do you think he could work on this project? So it was really like your best party. Like, let's just pull in the folks that we know are super productive and care about this. So we had a joint fire science project, and we worked with two different wildfire councils. So the one in the south, that's FireWise Southwest Colorado, and then the one a little further north, those are West Region Wildfire Council groups. And we had a joint fire science that brought us together. And during that time, we really refined our data collection methods, and I'm going to talk about next. And that's when we decided, like, let's make ourselves an official team, whatever that means. Like, we had a secret handshake. Like, really, it means nothing to be an official team. But we gave ourselves a name, and we had a logo. And we started talking about our work at different conferences, and a lot of people were interested, and that's why we kind of spun off now this nonprofit center. So we're starting a project now, that purple one up on top, that's Grand County. We're starting a project there, and we're working in the state of Washington with some folks outside of Wenatchee, and we're probably going to do a project in New Mexico. And since these illustrative videos have been released, we literally have a list of communities who want to work with us, so we're trying to figure out a way to make that happen. So what do we do? This is, so that was kind of like who we are and how we come together. And then my second goal is to kind of tell you about our data process, our data collection process. So there's like the nuts and bolts of how we collect this data. But it's kind of philosophically bigger than just this data collection effort, and I'm trying to find a way to articulate this well. But we think that community programs should come from some conceptual model, like what is their model of what they're trying to do there. And in our case, we're suggesting you should try to engage with everyone in the community, not just the loudest voices. You need to engage with as many people as you can in a really systematic way so that you can take your scarce resources and leverage them. So ultimately, the way change happens oftentimes in these programs is someone from the local fire department or someone from the local program ends up on your parcel, and they go through it with you, and they look at your house and they look at your vegetation, and they're like, you need to do this, you need to do this, you really got to put vents over these screens. So it's like really detailed information, and hopefully they leave them with some kind of written report that tells them what they need to do. So that's very labor intensive. It takes a lot of time. But okay, they just did that. And then, you know, they're human beings. I'm sure no one in this room has ever done this, but they get distracted. Like, they had the best intentions. They were going to do all this work, but then they get busy with life, so they don't necessarily follow up. So again, we need to have a way for homeowners to, you know, follow up. We need to have data-driven ways for the person, the fire department, to get in touch with those people again and kind of nudge them to do what they're supposed to do. And then maybe a way for the them to collect some data from the homeowners, like, oh, I did this, here's a picture, how does this go? So we're trying to wrap these programs up, you know, in their conceptual model of how they do things to have it all, their data's collected, and they know how to access it, because when they have those data, they can tell their stories. They can tell their stories about change in their communities, and that's really important. So the process that we use is we send a letter out. So we have a community that wants to, you know, implement the WIRE approach, and they send out a letter, and we tell them that we're going to start this process, and first of all, you're going to see the local fire department's going to drive by your house, and they're going to do a rapid risk assessment from the road. So it's going to take like a minute maybe. And they're going to look at your access to your house and your whether or not your structure is flammable and vegetation and those sorts of things. It's going to be real quick. And then we're going to follow up with that with a mail survey. And the survey goes to every person in that community. It's not a sample, it's a census. It's everybody in the community. And the survey and the assessment are done by the local fire protection district or the local wildfire council. So we get incredible response rates. We've had we're doing all through mail. We've tried online and different permutations, and so far mail has worked best for us. And we've gotten response rates from in the 60s, and our lowest ones are probably like 39%. And we only do one postcard and one follow-up mailing. So we don't do the full Dillman 3 mailing just because it's pretty expensive for those few that you get back. The point being, though, in this day and age, I'm sure many of you do survey research in this room. Those are incredible results. So we send out the survey, and then we pair these things. So we're able to pair the assessment data with the survey data, so we know what a parcel looks like, and then we know what the human looks like, what their experiences have been, how long they've lived there, what they think about wildfire, if they think the fire department's going to save their home. And we can combine those data to try to understand, are there social aspects of this human being that lives on this parcel that can explain why this parcel looks the way it does, why it's either in great shape or it's an utter mess, or why it's in great shape and all the neighbors are utter messes. So we have these data, and we can tease out these interesting stories. And we work really close with the practitioners throughout the way. So we sit down with them, we go over results, we talk about things. So it's interactive throughout. So this is excuse me, this is what this rapid risk assessment looks like. And they do different assessments, are different in different communities. So this is what West Region Wildfire Council uses. In Colorado Springs, they do assessments like this, and they actually post them on a website if you ever look in the Colorado Springs website, and they use like 25 attributes, and then they have overall risk ratings that are color-coded. So until Mike Lester puts down the gauntlet and says everyone in Colorado has to do these the same, which would be so beautiful for our sake, maybe not for local programs, they all are different. So now we're working with folks up in the state of Washington. It's completely different. But there's a few key points here. One is, so this is what the professional is doing from the road. Then we took these same attributes and we morphed them into survey questions. So in the survey, we asked them about, you know, do you have a wood roof? Do you not? And then we tell them, you know, your overall risk rating for your parcel is based on all these attributes. What do you think you are? Low, moderate, high? So this way we can tell, one, is there a discrepancy? And sometimes the professional's wrong, so we're not suggesting that, you know, the professional's doing it from the road, so we're not suggesting that's the truth and these people are wrong. And you'll see why that's okay, that's fine. You just want to have a conversation. So being wrong is always okay too. Sometimes that starts conversations. But what we know is then if someone tells us they have a wood roof, and then they go on, and that's 200 points, so you can kind of see how they're weighted. And then they go on and tell us that they think they're at moderate risk. We know that they don't really understand how serious a wood roof is. And you can do everything else perfect, but you're just still going to be in trouble. So these data in themselves are pretty interesting. So then our partners use them, and they do this mapping exercise. And oftentimes these data are collected as part of the community wildfire protection planning process. And that's a process that a community comes together and they identify risk to their community and where it comes from, and then they prioritize what they're going to do about it. And then oftentimes these parcel level risk assessments are part of that community wildfire protection planning process. So so this is you know, interesting, and it's useful to the local programs. But I'm going to highlight in a little bit how we've started using these in a way that really causes behavioral change. And that's the super cool part as a social scientist. So, and then we do these surveys. So I told you we do the same characteristics. We ask about experience, knowledge, attitudes, etc. And to date, we've done this in, we have over 6,000 parcels, and we've done like 80 communities. So we have data in a lot of different places. So why do you want both sources of data? Why don't you just do the rapid assessments and call it good? Because these surveys are a lot of work, and communities have to do them, and they cost money, and they take a lot of time. Well, there's this story I'm going to tell, but part of this broader picture is this concept of adapting to wildfire. And part of adapting to wildfire is change on the landscape. Like you have to, you know, reduce wildfire risk so that you don't risk losing your home in a wildfire, and that you're safe enough so you feel comfortable about putting more fire on the landscape. You're not worried about a prescribed burn maybe near your community. But it's also about how you think about wildfire, that it's not this one-shot thing, that you don't think necessarily that the fire department's going to be just standing there saving your house, and that you understand it's going to happen repeatedly over time, and you understand your role. And those are social issues. So with the social data, we can see, are we moving toward adaptation over time? And you can see, just looking at this graph, the bar chart rather, on the left, if you look at the overall risk rating, the rapid assessment, so that's the one done by the professional from the truck, that's the orange one, and then the household surveys, the red one. And so in general, when you just look at it, what pops out at you is that the household survey is skewed off to the left end of the scale, and that's the low end. And this is a composite of all our data set together. So quite honestly, if you look at this community by community, it just is very different across communities, and that's pretty interesting. But in general, people tend to underestimate their risk, and that's probably not a super surprising finding. And then if you look at specific attributes, the interesting thing is some of the attributes that people can't do anything about, like background fuels, oftentimes we have found those to be overestimated. So they think background fuels are worse than they actually are. So, and that's one where I would say the professional's assessment is probably more accurate, like they are trained at knowing what background fuels are. So, but with defensible space, you kind of see this same pattern. So the way it's ordered, it's the same way. So that's less risk over on the left side. That means that you have defensible space, you know, greater than 150 feet around your house. And over on the right, that means that your defensible space isn't starting till at least 10 feet out, or 10 feet or less out. So it means you have flammable vegetation close to your home. And again, you see this same thing where homeowners tend to think they have more defensible space than they do. And there could be a couple reasons for this, and it's really interesting. In one community, we really think it comes down to people not knowing what 10 feet is versus 30 feet. I mean, I probably don't know what 10 feet versus 30 feet are, so it's not like these, you know, but it's just not, humans aren't real great at distance. So the point is, you know, and that kind of spurred the folks when we were talking about that program. They're like, let's go out there and leave them with like big tape measures or something, and we'll measure, you know, just kind of innovative ways to communicate. What's 30 feet versus 10 feet? So then that was kind of why you want both pieces of data. And then if we look at why collect community-specific information, because part of it is there are these anecdotes that are out there. People say things that, you know, like, geez, it's all the seasonal homeowners, like we are perfect, but these seasonal homeowners, they are a huge problem. And we can put some data around that. Or everyone thinks that the fire department's going to save their home. Well, this is for this area in San Miguel County, which is down by Telluride. And what we found was that, right, half the people said they thought that the fire department might save their home. So that's half, but that's not everyone. And a quarter said, I don't think it's very likely they'll save my home. And then another quarter says, I don't really know. I have no idea how this business works. And the interesting thing is, I've been working on a paper lately using these data that looks at risk preferences. And what you find is, what I found with the data I used, which was a full data set, was that actually the people who thought the fire department was going to save their home, they actually did have better defensible space around their home. So maybe they you know, and I couldn't tease out causality with the kind of data and modeling I have, but the point is that it's not like they think it's going to save their home so they don't do anything. And that's often the way that statement is just left out there hanging. And therefore, that's bad. So, and the other thing is, we have this paper that we have coming out in Society and Natural Resources, kind of looking at the level of variation, excuse me, on a lot of these measures. And what we find is that if you just did, we had community variables. So we had a whole bunch of variables that described the community, like how engaged are they with wildfire, and do they have an ambassador, and you know, just all sorts. Do they have a community wildfire protection plan in place? Just all sorts of variables that we hypothesized would be related to kind of how adapted they might be to wildfire. But that was all community level variables. And what we found is that looking at differences across communities, those variables could only explain about 14% of the variation. And at the county level, it's really, you know, very small percent. But a lot of what's going on here are individual variation, and those individuals are what make up your community. So you really need to understand these guys to understand your community. So now I want to talk about a little bit about like how does this change the world, or does it change the world? And like just now when I said change the world, that was like way bigger than I meant to say. Does it change any programs? Does it make things better in communities? So we do these surveys, we do these assessments, and now we want to do, you know, kind of tailor local programs. And one of the things I forgot to mention is we work with communities who are all in different places in terms of where their programs are. So some communities have programs that have been ongoing for a really long time, and we come in and we can kind of do this data collection and it provides us an opportunity to assess how's that program doing, because we know like who gets information from these folks and what do their parcels look like and what are their expectations. And then sometimes, like right now, as I mentioned, we're just starting a project up in the state of Washington outside of Wenatchee. They had, you know, as you probably know, they had terrible wildfires in 2015, and they were able to pass a mill levy to really up their program up there. So they have 3 seasonal mitigation folks that just work with homeowners on mitigation, and that might not sound like much, but it's a really big deal. Very few communities would have those kind of resources. So they're just getting going, and we're going to start working with them. So in their case, it's kind of more of a let's come in now and help you guys figure out maybe where you want to go. So part of it is changing conversations. So oftentimes what we do is we collect data, and then we go back to the communities and we talk about the fact that we collected data. So this infographic is from this community called the Town of Mountain Village, which is in San Miguel County. It's at the base of the gondola for Telluride. So anybody who knows that part of the state, the conversation there was very much like, you know, these people are just wealthy people. They don't really care about this topic. We can't get them engaged. It's just, you know, hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. So the interesting thing was the first little thing that happened was when we sent out the surveys, and they have a lot of seasonal residents because, you know, so because people have so many homes, you can't live in any one of them too long. So they, the survey, we got back 41%, and they were so right there. The community members and the leaders in Town of Mountain Village were like, "You're kidding me! You got 41% back from our folks," and we're like, "Yes, we did," and. So right there, that kind of changed their thinking about these people. And that's a point that our practitioners have brought up, is just doing these surveys and asking people their opinions. We all feel so, as a person, like I've been doing survey research forever. I worked for a survey research firm after my master's, before my PhD, and I have been in this field for a really long time, and we can get so hesitant, right? Because everybody's surveying these days, that sometimes we forget, you know, this is their chance to be heard, and this is the first time anyone has asked them about wildfire in their community and on their parcel. So just the surveys are in themselves a great part of the program. So the point is, in this case, what happened was, another part of the discourse in that town, in addition to the fact that people didn't think folks cared, was that nobody would be willing to cut down trees for whatever reason, mostly for aesthetics, like they like the trees and they're not going to cut them down. And we found that to not be the case. That actually 77% said, yeah, they'd be happy to cut down trees. But one of the big issues was they have HOA restrictions, and they're really strict. Like you have to get a permit for every tree you're going to cut down or something of the sort. So just having this little result, this little infographic, you're all researchers here, you're like, oh my gosh, is this for a second grader maybe? This is so powerful, and it comes from their community. It's really, I just can't stress the value of this kind of information in terms of changing the conversation. So the community's really just taken off. After this point, they've been working on the HOA rules, and really West Region Wildfire Council was working with this community, and they've really backed off because the community is just doing their own things. They got buy-in from business leaders and all sorts of folks. So it was like kind of one of our, you know, success stories. The other thing is that this kind of work can really transform local programs. So that can kind of change the conversation so you can implement your program and think about moving forward. And this is actually about changing the program. So we often ask, what stops you from reducing the risk on your property? And then the top answers that we get are lack of specific information on what to do and lack of options for removing yard waste. And this really varies by community. But you notice those are the top answers, and it's not necessarily financial. So the council that we work with, one of their big tools has always been a cost share program, and I'm going to show you, like, they just didn't find great participation, but money wasn't necessarily the constraint. It's definitely a constraint in some places, but not necessarily here. So what did they do? So West Region Wildfire Council has really focused on community chipping programs. So those are days where a chipper comes into the community, and if you've cleared slash, you can pile it all up and they'll chip it and get rid of it for you. So that's a way in which the data just suggested to them, okay, what programs are probably going to work best? Let's do chipping and put our money into that maybe instead of a cost share or something else. So this is the piece that has garnered us so much interest. Sometimes I wonder if it's like too much interest, but I think it's great. So a lot of you, are you familiar with kind of behavioral economics and the notion of nudges? So Thaler got the Nobel Prize last year in economics for behavioral economics, and nudges are little pieces of information that can give you a behavioral response. So if you live in Fort Collins and you get your water from the city or your electricity, you've probably gotten those notices, and then they tell you about your consumption, and then they tell you about your energy efficient neighbors, how much they consume, and then you get like a smiley face or a sad face. I might have gotten a sad face once on water. So, and that little information then, the idea is it should incentivize you, like, oh my God, I got this sad face, I guess I'm going to turn off the faucet or whatever, and then they provide you with information. Well, one thing about nudging in that realm is they have it really easy because they have a behavioral response from you because they're constantly monitoring how much electricity you use or how much water you use. So during the Obama administration, there was really a focus on trying to move behavioral science into federal programs and into government programs in general. And they had a bureau and folks did fellowships there. And the Forest Service Research Economics Unit in Washington office was really interested in this topic. And no one was really working in the area. So I was really fortunate to have this partnership. And I said, well, we'll try doing some nudges, with our folks to see what happens. So the problem was, what's our behavioral outcome? Because like mitigating your parcel, if it's a mess, like it takes a really long time, right? So even if I give you some information today, that little piece of information, if you go out and trim 2 branches, what am I going to do? Like look at your parcel before to see if you trim the branches and then go back out and check. And so that really wasn't going to, that kind of behavioral response that the utilities have, we didn't really have that. So what we decided to do was to nudge people with their parcel level of risk assessment data. So we're going to tell them, this is what your parcel was rated at, and this is what your neighbor's was rated at. And the behavioral response we had was we set up these individualized websites, and we gave people a code. So you can only go into your own website, look at your own assessment. You can't go into your neighbor's. So therefore, we were able to track, did they go here? And then if they went there, they went into these individualized websites. And if you want to try it, you can go into that coloradowildfire.org, my home, and put in test 01, and you can see what it looks like. And so it has West Region Wildfire Council's logo on it, and then it has the details about your assessment. You can see the attributes there, and so like those pictures were static and they didn't change, based on your parcel, but the pointer did on what you were rated. And then we had a Google Earth image of your home, and then we had your address. So part of it also, if you talk to communication scholars, is this is a really individualized, personalized form of communication. So it's like the whole ball of wax. It gives the economist a behavioral outcome. It is great for the program. because it's so individualized. And then there was this hot button, so they could do this and schedule a site visit, which is, like we said, that we think is the conduit to change, is when they get on the site and make change. So what we found, I know this is like holy lot of stuff going on this PowerPoint, but excuse me. So we had 3 treatments because, you know, this is research. And we have to do experiments to understand what works best. And the amazing thing is our practitioner partners are really on board with this. And they're often asking, how can we do this? If we do it this way, is it okay for you guys? Will you get good data? Is there something else we could do? So they're often willing to sacrifice the immediate response that they could get for an experimental design. So what we did was we sent out these letters and we had 3 treatments. So the baseline treatment was just the basic way that they often send out information to homeowners about wildfire risk. And they just told them about their community level of risk. So that was from their community wildfire protection plan. So we say, you live in a community at high risk or something. So some people, one group got just that treatment. But they were asked to find out more, go to that website and put in your secret number. So then the second treatment, we told them about their community level of risk. Okay, your community has you know, a high level of risk, and we've gone out and assessed your parcel, and you have this level of risk, you know, whatever it is. And then the third treatment was, you know, kind of really following that Fort Collins model that some of you have seen. We said, this is your community level of risk, this is your parcel level of risk, and these are your 10 nearest neighbors, what their risk is. And so we had to do an experimental design and all of that. And what we found was, so just looking at the top one first, the response by property rating. So this is just the control. The control is where your individualized rating wasn't in the letter, but we told them about the community level. And then the treatment, so it would be either of those 2 treatments. We lumped them together. So it was somebody who knew their individual rating. And what we found was that the control is in the orange and the treatment is in the red. So what you just see here in general is that when you tell people whose parcels are at very high or extreme risk, when you tell them that information, they're more likely to go to that individualized website relative to someone whose parcel is at extreme or very high risk, and you just told them about their community level of risk rating. And part of that is probably this underestimation of risk. This was probably news to them, that they were very high or extreme, or, you know, very likely could have been. And actually, for a bunch of these communities, we have social data. So we're trying to tease out those stories with the surveys, like, were they the people who underestimated risk? But it's complicated. We don't have enough observations. I'm sure no one has ever been in that situation before. So we're collecting more data. But the point is, you really get kind of a different response. But actually, if you look at that lower end of the scale, when you tell people they're low, that their risk rating's low, relative to just telling them the general community level risk rating, then they're less likely to go to the individualized website. So you could imagine once we collect more data, or we saw this result was consistent across a lot of different communities, we might suggest, and I'm saying we might suggest because we don't have the data yet, but it might make sense for programs to do this kind of thing, but split it so that the people who are at high or very high risk get their individual information, and the people on the lower end, maybe we just tell them about their community level of risk, and then hope they all go to the website, right? Like, that's our goal, is to get them to the website. And the other piece is then when you look at, because we have this comparison piece in there, and what we found is that, and it fits in with this story here, is that if your own rating is higher than the average neighbors, so you're the slacker among your neighbors who hasn't cleaned up their parcel, when you relay that information in the letter, because they got that treatment, they're more likely to respond than people who just got the information about the community risk in general. But when they're lower, So when you're like, oh my God, my neighbors are all slackers and I'm doing really well, then you would have been maybe more responsive to just the general information. So we're just teasing out these stories. But this way of getting these wildfire risk assessments, when we started doing these, people would, I'm not a fire scientist. I have 3 degrees in economics. I'm like the most dismal of dismal economists, right? So people has had really heartfelt, strong opinions about these risk assessments and like, well, they're not really accurate because you're just looking at the parcel and you didn't look at the guy next door and it didn't have this or that. And I have come to think about them so differently. You want them to represent something that's true and that it represents relative risks. So like if your parcel is red, that's notably different than a parcel that's green. So I think that these do that, and they are great for planning, and communities do them. But they're done from this truck and they happen fast, but even if they're wrong, what we found is when people went to these individualized websites, they might disagree with how their home was assessed, and they will follow up to argue about that. Not argue about it, but just say, well, and actually they are wrong sometimes, because from the road, especially with siding, there can be siding that looks like some kind of flammable siding, but it's actually not. So they always have a heuristic where they defer to it being worse. If in doubt, give it a higher category. So the point is, though, I've become to think about these assessments more like BMI. It's just going to tell you something. And plenty of people who maybe they have high BMIs because they're athletes or something and they're fine. But it can be an indicator, and you just want to delve in more. And so these rapid risk assessments, once you get them back to people, because no one was really getting these back to the homeowners very well. West Region Wildfire Council said they had done thousands of them and they had never gotten them back. And I did some research in Colorado Springs where they post them on a public-facing website, so you could always go in and see what your overall risk assessment was. And we asked people, have you gone to the website and looked at your assessment? And actually very few people had done that. So people had not gone to that website. And that was before the Waldo Canyon fire, so that could have changed now. But the point is, this is getting this information out as it hasn't really before. And what they found, this is kind of an old thing, but in this community of Cedar Edge, West Region, they just had no traction in that community. They had a cost share program forever, no one took advantage of, and they had very few programs. But you see, we did these nudge letters in August, and I know the absolute number is small, 17, but if you look at all previous years, by the end of that year, those were projects done. So West Region had gotten on their parcel, suggested a project, and did it with them. That's a huge difference. So, we're still measuring outcomes. This is really ongoing, and like I said, we're about to collect a whole bunch more data. But it really has made a difference. So they feel like it's made a huge difference in their program. And this has been one of the products that folks have really asked us for. So we're trying to find a way to provide this to folks. And most of this work was developed in the public domain through Joint Fire Science, National Fire Plan, things like that. So things like the websites, we would like to be able to set those up for communities at like no cost or very low cost or something. We just want communities to collect data in a systematic way and use it. So that's kind of where we're headed. So that's my story. And it's the Wildfire Research Team, and I encourage you to go look at the illustrated videos that we have. They're beautiful, and they're a great way to communicate. For us, we've gotten a lot of attention, and I think not just for wildfire, they'd be great way to communicate on many topics. So that's it. Thank you. Megan.
You mentioned some kind of myths or generalized stories people tell about perceptions of homeowners in the Are there any other ones that you can share? Or maybe it varies from community to community. Has changed your perception of homeowners with high fires?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. One interesting, I mean, I don't know if this was a perception, but, you know, kind of putting data where you might not think it would be. When we analyze data from this community of Log Hill Mesa, which is right outside of Ouray, or not right outside of, it's in Ouray County, it's right outside of Ridgway. Beautiful, beautiful community, very engaged. So we asked people about their willingness to participate in a cost share program. So it's like a willingness to pay question. It's a willingness to participate. And how much are you willing to share? How much would you be willing to share? And the interesting thing is that the in that community, so this result is not, we did not find this in other communities, but in that community, individuals who lived at the highest risk parcels, so they were on those extreme or very high, they were less likely to want to participate in a cost share program. So that kind of, it makes this point of like, cost shares are great, you know, it's a great tool to have, you know, in your little toolbox. But in that case, if your goal is to move the people at the highest risk to take action, that's not going to be your tool. Maybe you need to really do the specific information or something. So I don't know if that was really quite in that realm, but it was a surprising result that, you know, you would only know if you have data.
Well, what are some types of things that would earn you an extreme overall risk rating, like through your assessment?
So the most heavily weighted, if you look, the most heavily weighted attributes are having a wood roof and then having, oops, here we go, having, so you see, these are the weights here. So having a wood roof, that will kind of hurt you. And then having not much defensible space, you could get 100 points. And then background fuels will affect it. And then the building exterior you see is like 60 points. So you can kind of see how those fit together. So, you know, it has to be some combination, but certainly flammable building materials on your home, you just can't have a low rating. Mike?
Yeah, Log Hill Mesa looks pretty good today. How did you flip people around?
Oh my goodness, a perfect question. I feel like I forgot to mention this. So Log Hill Mesa, this is the first community we've done this in. So we did the rapid assessments and surveys in 2012. And then we went back last year in 2017 to do the rapid assessments again to see, like, you know, are we really seeing changes on these parcels? And we are surveying people again. And so certainly some of those homes turn over, and we're just starting to look at those data. Anecdotally, I would say I think it's just a very engaged community. So West Region kind of views it as they've been super open to us doing all this research there. It takes a lot of time on their part. They've been really supportive. So I think part of it is the community engagement. But, you know, we'll see, right? Like, I mean, so that's what will be so, I'm so anxious to kind of get a look at those data more closely. And we're going to go, I think, like May 5th, we're going to have preliminary results. We're meeting with the residents of Log Hill because that's a mitigation day, right? So we're going to go and have a 1-hour meeting with the residents there and then just talk about the results over time. But I haven't even looked at the parcel risk assessment data yet to see how they're paired. So I'm guessing if Lily or Jamie were here, they would say it's because it's such an engaged community. So it was kind of engaged in 2012, but then they've really refined some of their, like they changed their cost share. It used to be a lot higher, they changed it, and they have great support on their chipper days and all of that.
Are face-to-face meetings sort of part of the program? You just mentioned you were planning on a face-to-face meeting with that community, and kind of as part of that, I guess, how do you as researchers sort of build credibility with the communities throughout the process?
So we try to always So oftentimes when we do those presentations, we try to, and in general, when we do presentations on this work, we always try to have it be a practitioner and a researcher. And I'll tell you what, as researchers, I would say we've gotten a lot better over time. But the first time I ever did this kind of paired thing, it was kind of before Wiry Team. This was a long time ago in Pueblo at some Colorado Wildfire conference, like a long time ago, where I did something with Chris Barth. And I'm like, you know, I'll go to economics conferences and people would be like, oh, you're a good presenter or something. So I didn't think I was the worst. And then I went to this conference of folks who were not my peers, you know, who were doing these programs. And I think I did a really bad job. And Chris was really diplomatic about it, but I just, you know, I didn't say like heteroscedasticity, but I didn't do a great job. So the way we do it is we tag team, and we've gotten so much better over time because we interact so much and we hear their words. So Jamie, who is the assistant director of the West Region Wildfire Council, last week I heard him talking about social landscape, and I have used it twice now in my own talking about, instead of like saying socioeconomic characteristics of the community, I said social landscape, because I think his words are better. They resonate with people. So that's part of this whole Wiry Team part that I don't know if I've really communicated with us working together. I think we've gotten better at communicating, and I think our partners, they're so interested in research. Like they're always, you know, the other day they sent us something like, look they nudged me here, and then they asked me about what I did. Do you think we could do this, and could we make an experiment? So we've changed each other. A lot. So, but we do try to do that. We try to go to the communities, and sometimes we don't present. Sometimes just our practitioner partners will present because, you know, we're far away. But if they want us to come, I try to go. And I'm like, I love sleeping in my own bed at home, but I will go because I think it's really important. So. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned how communications experts help create the website. And how other ways have you incorporated communication studies?
Okay. I misspoke there. I said, so communication folks have said it's really good, and so that was kind of exaggeration too, maybe, because my husband is in the journalism and media communication program, but we went through it. So we have not, and that is a shortcoming. I think part of it is because I hear it at home because I talk about this all the time. Like, you know, I talk about my children a lot, but they're adults and they're kind of doing their own things. So now I talk about Wiry, like I love my Wiry people and we're so great. So I talk about it all the time, and we have not yet really had the resources. And it's not just the resources. I think we haven't taken the time. I think we need to think about that. Like, how are we communicating? Because like today, I don't just want to communicate like this specific thing in this specific approach. I really want to spur people to think about like this as a model and adapt it and have it maybe a different model for their piece. So we haven't done that, and we need to. Tony?
Can you talk a little bit about how the work that you're doing is received by research stations and your program supervisors and all that kind of stuff? And just talk maybe be a little more reflective. You talked in your introduction how this is a new path for you.
Yeah.
It took you a while to get into it, and it's not how research is typically done, right? It's kind
Yeah.
of split between the research and practice. And so what kind of support and feedback are you getting, you know, kind of the positive side, and then what kind of pushback and kind of resistance can you talk about?
Yeah. That's a good question, and it's. I think it does kind of get at that, sometimes that tension. I've been really, really fortunate. I have had so much support. I mean, support where, you know, hey, can your team do this? Or like, you know, with funds, I've gotten a fair amount of funding through the station to do this, and they have been extremely supportive. And I was worried about, well, I don't know what this looks like. Like, I'm a federal employee, and I'm working with these other folks. That's okay. We're trying to start a nonprofit, you know, like, what is that about? And I actually, to be honest with you in this room, I was stepped back a little bit from that, like, well, maybe I'm breaking some rule I don't know about, because when you work for the federal government, you're often breaking rules you don't know about. So my station director, actually, who's John Phipps, he has offered to go out and sell the center for us and try to help us secure sustained funding for the center. So it has been very well received that we're doing it this way. They love that it's cross agency. They love that it's research and practice. The station paid for us to do those illustrated videos. Megan worked on them, and I think that was a lot of money and time. And they chose to promote our project. So I don't know that would be that way in different projects. I have a particularly accommodating program manager, but our station director himself has been really good about this to us. So I've been really lucky. I'll tell you what's hard is it takes a lot of energy, especially now that we release these videos and we're getting all this attention. I have like 1 million people contacting me. We are really concerned about getting papers out, publishing. I think it's really important to show that this is good scholarship. It's important for our partners to know that the data collection approaches and methods that we're using are making it through the peer-reviewed model, that it's not some haphazard slash dash sort of thing, that we're accounting for problems, that we're, you know, because often like with response rates, we want to see, do the people who respond to the survey, do the distribution on how their parcels are rated, does that look like the population in general, or did we only hear from people on high or low, you know, parcels? So the scholarship part, I think, has pushed us to be in a better place. But like everyone, it's like, oh, I wish I had more energy so I could get the papers out. Mike?
I think we're out of time, but yes.
Last question.
Well, as a state agency, I want to say that we're excited about this on the one hand, because it's a methodology we think can be replicated. We really could use some help trying to figure out how we can extend this. On the other hand, it's a little disturbing because how individualized it is by county. What would motivate people in one county doesn't seem to necessarily motivate people in the adjoining county.
No, I mean, and that, I would say, I never quite know how to respond to that. And that was a lot of the pushback was like, well, you can't generalize. And I'm like, no, you can't. Like, that's the whole point. But like, the National Cohesive Strategy they recognize the heterogeneity. So not recognizing it by not collecting data doesn't solve your problem. And I do think that ultimately, ultimately, I think you can use your resources, your scarce local resources better, because you can be more effective, and you can garner more support, because like when they've gone out and done this, you know, our partners are saying, then they get local businessmen on board, or they get unusual partners. So like USAA is really interested in what we're doing, and they care a lot about some communities. They have some communities where USAA is an insurance company that you get through military service. So military people tend to lump together, well, of course, if there's like a Colorado Springs where there's a military installation, but also for retirees tend to lump together. So I think ultimately, those are the kinds of stories, though, we also want to tell. This is what we're really being careful to track. How much does this cost? And the part that people don't see, though, is I've gotten funding to do all this, the social part, and it's really expensive. I don't think communities are going to be able to pay for it, and that's why, like John Phipps and others are trying to help me get sustained funding, kind of like the CPAW sort of effort where someone else funds that to help communities. So. Thank you.